And I'd like you to take on the historical aspect of the term colorblindness, as Coleman has done, and please respond to it.
This is kind of interesting, and I kind of like the way that this is structured. So the moderator is like actually saying they said X, and I want you to address this.
We run into trouble when we transpose today's meaning of a particular word onto the past.
Well, you're the one that changed the meaning.
Yeah.
You're literally the one that changed the meaning.
He's like, listen, I'm redefining this word in a different way. So how dare you use your original definition that matches up with this other person's original definition to make an argument?
That is
you didn't
also
accept my definition.
That's also in billions of Americans' brains because they've been educated in America over the last 40 years.
Yes.
Welcome back to Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan, and we have Jamelle Bouie and Coleman Hughes debating this question: does colorblindness perpetuate racism? And in the opening statements, we saw fundamentally where they disagree. Jamelle Bouie taking the point of view that to embrace colorblindness is to turn a blind eye to reality, the reality that racism exists and continues to exist. He makes the point that you can't begin to address inequality if you don't want to name and acknowledge that inequality. He cites several examples in other contexts where it's been named and addressed, but he asks why, on the question of racial inequality, do we have to pretend that it doesn't there? And he does feel that it amounts to a pretense. Coleman.
Notice in the paraphrasing, nothing really specific about the Marxist stuff.
He probably didn't even catch it.
Yeah, I'm pointing it out because you always say, and this guy probably is just an old school liberal.
Yep.
He's the one who is carrying water for these Marxists.
Well, I mean, I don't know if he is specifically, because I don't know anything about John's specific political views, because he does a lot of the moderation for these conversations, but he could theoretically, because he doesn't understand what's being discussed, as most people don't.
Why didn't he come out and say, listen, and he threw a bunch of Marxist stuff in there to...
Right. Yeah, because he missed it.
Right.
So, well, even if you caught it, if you're the moderator in a debate, I don't know if you should be pointing out, like, he did a Marxism. Like, I don't know.
He pointed out in other contexts, like bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. The proletariat should claim part of the means of production. Otherwise, you're never really going to end racism. And back to you.
Right. Back to you, John.
Right.
Argues the opposite point of view. He says that colorblindness is the antidote to racism. He would, as he said, enshrine colorblindness in our institutions and in our thoughts and ideas and in our documents, and that the failure to do so has actually exacerbated racism, leading to race-conscious policies that he has described as disastrous. I want to go take this in parts and pieces. I would like to ask each of you to actually not just continually make your opening points, but to respond to some of what your opponents have been saying as I bring those up. Jamelle, I want to go to you first and ask you to address Coleman's recitation of the list of starting with abolitionists and others who have pushed back against obvious manifestations of racism, and then through the leaders of the civil rights movement embracing colorblindness as he defines it. And he went through quite a long list of that. And I'd like you to take on the historical aspect of the term colorblindness, as Coleman has done, and please respond to it.
Sure thing. I want to begin this with...
So this is kind of interesting, and I kind of like the way that this is structured. So the moderator is like actually saying they said X, and I want you to address this. Like he's asking very pointed questions, which I think is good. And maybe we should, going forward, if we ever moderate conversations, usually we're in the conversations, right? But if we ever moderate conversations, maybe that's the role we should take, because I think that's a little bit more interesting. And it kind of can prevent some of the meandering that happens in these debates where people just say whatever they want for like 20 minutes.
Well, we should do it when we're in the conversations, then they dodge our questions. I mean, I try to do it. I mean, I say, that's not a response. You're not answering the question. A lot of people don't like it because I will interrupt when I feel like they're going on a tirade that's just completely off topic.
Right. But it's just psychologically, like if you're in the debate, and if we're in the debate and we say you're not answering the question, that's different than the moderator who's neutral or supposed to be neutral is saying, I want you to answer this specific question.
Right. Well, I'm
with a
going to be
focus on
neutral moderator on Tuesday, so
Who are we talking to on Tuesday?
pandering politics.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Exciting.
On the historical aspect of the term colorblindness, as Coleman has done, and please respond to it.
Sure thing. I want to begin this with a focus on Wendell Phillips in particular. If people aren't aware of Wendell Phillips, he's probably one of the most famous abolitionists of the antebellum period, sort of really a luminary, a Garrisonian, a colleague, contemporary of Garrison, Frederick Douglass, et cetera, a really important guy. So it's really significant that Coleman points to Wendell Phillips as kind of the origin point for the term colorblindness. And in Coleman's gloss, he says that what Phillips meant was a government.
You like that? You like that? Coleman's gloss. Ooh, it's a little shit right there. He glossed over it. All right. He skipped it.
Wendell wasn't a Marxist.
Government that did not recognize race in any manner, that took an entirely neutral approach to citizens. But I don't think that's quite correct. So Wendell Phillips uses the term colorblind, or specifically the phrasing government colorblind, in two instances at the beginning of 1865, the first time he uses them. The first is at a speech at the 32nd meeting of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society on January 26th, and again, a month later, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music on February 23rd. Now, the first instance is interesting because it's a big debate between Phillips and Garrison and Douglass and other abolitionists over President Lincoln's initial Reconstruction policies. Now, Lincoln's initial Reconstruction policies centered on the quick readmission of Louisiana to the Union. Louisiana kind of captured relatively early on in the war. And Lincoln's plan essentially is we have a percentage, about I think 10 or 15% of Louisiana residents pledged to the Union, and then they can be readmitted on full privileges. And in the relevant portion of the speech, the portion that leads up to the use of the phrase government colorblind, Phillips excoriates this policy. And the reasoning he gives is that simply readmitting Louisiana without any attention to the relationships of subordination and domination between whites and blacks in the state would not address anything. It simply recapitulate the conditions of slavery. We'd be right back to where we started. It's in that context that he says a government colorblind, no distinction of race in the camp or in the Senate. So colorblindness here in the context of the portion of the speech does not mean the non-recognition of race. It means the non-recognition of racism. That is the rejection of the legitimacy of any kind of hierarchy by the state. The state says there's no race hierarchies, no.
This is such bullshit.
Yeah.
Such bullshit.
So
bullshit.
So if the argument was, I'm trying to find the speech that he's referring to actually check this out. I don't have it yet, but if
these laws must not be racist, but you could acknowledge race,
right? Like if you have a state that was formerly a slave state and you admit it into the Union without changing the laws, obviously it's just going to recreate slavery because you haven't changed anything. And so this guy's arguing and saying, well, there should not be this, laws based on race, which would then get rid of laws based on racial subjugation, which would be a colorblind approach.
Right.
So what is his
argument is that they still acknowledge that race exists. Which it's like nobody ever said colorblind is not acknowledging. They're doing this complete straw man of colorblindness, as in you're supposed to never even be able to see race, physically see race.
Right.
It's like it's dumb. It's totally dumb.
Yeah, it's just this ridiculous straw man.
He's saying this colorblind law was designed to get rid of racism, but you could still see race. Mm-hmm. I win.
Did you know? Have you considered? It's like Bowie here is in the well. He's the guy in the well. And he's like, have you considered you can't be colorblind because people have eyes?
Yeah, exactly.
They can see things. Have you considered that?
Coleman Hughes totally annihilates this guy.
Yeah,
it's great.
No one is above or below.
So Jamel, it sounds like you are saying that this tension that we're discussing today is 120 years old. That this disagreement about what we meant by colorblindness goes way back.
Right.
I want to take that to Coleman to respond to.
Just real quick, I want to say my
Sure.
immediate point is that the way in which Coleman's evoking Phillips just isn't correct. Phillips is essentially making a race-conscious argument, but using a different kind of language. And we run into trouble when we transpose today's meaning of a particular word onto the past.
Well, you're the one that changed the meaning.
Yeah.
You're literally the one that changed the meaning.
He's like, listen, I'm redefining this word in a different way. So how dare you use your original definition that matches up with this other person's original definition to make an argument?
That
You
is
didn't
also
accept my definition.
That's also in billions of Americans' brains because they've been educated in America over the last 40 years.
Yes.
Just, oh my, what is going on here? They think that they can update society like an Apple update. It just goes out to everyone's brains and, oh, update. Look, oh yeah, this is a new software.
Yeah.
No respect for how culture works.
Okay, so Coleman, your an initial challenge is that from Jamel in relating to Phillips is that even then this disagreement over what the term meant existed and was relevant and had impact.
Well, I'll start simply by quoting Wendell Phillips, and I will let the audience decide what he means by this. Quote, when once the nation is absolutely irrevocably pledged to the principle. Sorry, this is the wrong quote. Sorry.
Let's start over.
Start again.
Yeah, sure.
I will start by quoting a relevant passage from Wendell Phillips, and you can decide what you think it means. Quote, God has chained this generation to the one great duty of eliminating from American politics the idea of race. Whenever an American magistrate is colorblind, unable to distinguish white from black, when that day comes, the duty of this generation is done and sealed, and this epoch is closed.
That sounds pretty definitive to me.
No, but you don't understand. It means something different.
So pulling out the quote is kind of devastating. You always do that, Sitch. You always bring out the critical race theory quote. You're like, here, let's just look at a quote here.
Because they try to be sneaky with this bullshit. They're like, did you mean that? And you're like, well, explain this quote. And then they're like, well, you see, I can redefine all the words to mean something different. It's like, oh, okay, that's good.
Let's just look at this quote from the Newland phone call here. Let's just read this real quick.
Right.
It's like always, it's just so devastating. It's so devastating.
So to me, I suppose reasonable people might disagree about any number of historical figures and what they believed, but it seemed very much that by colorblind, he meant what I mean by it. And when he passed away, when Phillips passed away, America's first black judge, George Lewis Ruffin, described him as one of the few white Americans wholly colorblind and free from race prejudice. Taken together, it seems that, Wendell Phillips really meant colorblind when he said colorblind.
Can I
Destroyed.
Yep.
Destroyed. Can I respond? Was Wendell Phillips a Marxist?
respond to that real quickly?
Yeah,
Sure.
please do.
Just so the thing to consider is that Phillips is not just speaking in the abstract here, right? He has a set of policies that he would like to see the government pursue. And again, we have to consider the context of the late 1860s. And so what Phillips wants is, first and foremost, he wants Black Americans to have the vote, which is considered at the time to not be a colorblind policy. It's very much considered to be a race-conscious policy. And he describes it as such in this January 26, 1865 speech. The second thing is he wants...
Okay, wait.
Yeah. How are you defining that to be to be race-based policy?
Well, they're doing, so he's doing this kind of like BS thing where it's, so if you have a society set up where you say, only white people can vote. And there's black people in the society as well. And you say, oh, well, we want to make it so that the law is colorblind, right?
Right.
So that everyone can vote. Then obviously, yes, the point of the law is so that black people can vote. Obviously. But the point of the colorblindness, the point of the argument is to show that the continual framing and arguing of things from that specific colorblind perspective is sufficient and valuable and will bring about the changes you want. So just saying, well, I mean, it was to help black people. No one's saying, but you, okay, you're the one making the argument that colorblind laws can't help black people. You're the one making that straw man argument. No one is saying that colorblind laws will not help black people.
Right. Why you're taking away the exclusivity of voting from whites. I mean, it's so simple to frame it as in the colorblind way.
Yes.
It's not giving the vote to blacks. It's denying them the vote.
Yes. And say theoretically, like, okay, so let's say that it wasn't colorblind in reality originally. Okay. So they say, okay, we're going to give black people the right to vote. So then what happens so then Asians can't vote? Because it says white people and black people. Doesn't say anything about Asians. Oh, you got to pass a law just for Asians.
No, I think they just opened it up to anyone could vote.
No. I understand that in reality. I'm saying under his stupid framework of anti-colorblindness, okay, if they had actually passed a law that just specifically said black people can vote too, they would have had to pass a law for every different ethnic group to vote.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. That's not how it went.
No.
I think blacks were going to get the vote before women. I think black people were going to get the vote before women were going to get the vote. And everyone was worried about how the optics of that. So they were like, they gave women suffrage before that became a reality.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
The redistribute land specifically to freed people, but also some free people. And so again, this is not a colorblind policy as we understand it today.
Okay.
Bullshit.
Well, again, so he snuck that in as we understand today. So he's according to his kind of BS definition.
Yeah, he's using his BS definition of colorblindness.
Right, because even in this, Clarence Thomas brought this up in his dissent, or his not dissent, his concurrence of the affirmative action ruling, was that policy, that law, the Freedmen's Bureau thing, there's a reason it was called the Freedmen's Bureau and not the Black People's Bureau. Because it was not about them being black, it's about them being former slaves. So even that, and the law was structured specifically for people that were slaves and were now free. So even that was a colorblind.
Wow,
yes.
Interesting.
Right. And it's weird because like essentially, so Bowie has constructed the straw man where he says colorblind laws can't help black people. Okay, which is a straw man. He's the one arguing that. So then whenever there's an example in the past of a colorblind law helping black people, he pretends that the law wasn't colorblind to conform with his original straw man position.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay.
To conform with his definition.
Yes.
So we're left with kind of a bind, right? Like, is Phillips just self-contradictory? Is he contradicting himself? Or is he, again, not talking about the recognition of race as identity, but the recognition of racism as a system of caste and subordination? There was not really a language for race as identity back in the 19th century, but there was a language of race and racism as caste and subordination. And the subsequent examples.
What is this? So he's never explained how he's differentiating this clearly. You can have a system of subordination and caste that is based on your identity, which is what race was being used to do.
Right. It could be an identity beyond race, I think is what you're saying.
Well, no, I'm saying he keeps saying that there's a difference between defining race as a, quote, identity and defining race as a, quote, system of subordination and caste. And it's like, well, racism was a system of subordination or systemic racism.
Based on identity.
Based on the identity of race. Right.
Yeah.
So he's making this distinction that he's never really fleshed out or explained why he's making. I mean, I guess he's just making this distinction because he wants to adopt the Marxist framing of systems as what matters and individuals don't matter. But he hasn't really explained in this conversation why it's valid to make this distinction he's making.
All this is word game bullshit. That's why I hate this stuff. It's completely brain dead, substanceless nonsense.
Right. Arguing about definitions and how things should be defined and all this garbage. Yeah.
Look, Sitch and I want to argue substance. We don't want to argue this lame brain. Let's redefine this so that we can win an argument.
Right. Well, that's what the annoying thing is that if you were to tell him that, he'd say, well, no. You're the one that's redefining race and racism. I'm the one originally using the correct definition. And you're like, okay, buddy. So it like forces you to have this stupid debate about definitions.
I won't. I'll just say, look, I don't want to debate you.
Okay.
Go write a thesaurus. Go write a dictionary somewhere. Get out my face.
Go write a thesaurus, you.
Get out my face. Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.